Throughout history, the world has seen the rise and fall of hundreds upon hundreds of empires. And in that history as well, nations that today that are rather small and minor on the global scale may very well have been a great power in its history. One such example is that of the Swedish Empire, an empire that lasted for little more than a century, reaching its apex in the middle of its existence. So, how did this small state become one of the strongest empires in Europe? And to answer that question, we need some history. We'll start by looking at the Kalmar Union. The Kalmar Union was a union between the crowns of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway from its establishment in 1397 until its dissolvement in 1521. This was supposed to be a personal rather than a political union, but Norway and Sweden were largely left to the whim of the Danish politically, as they were the strongest partner of the union. This was further compounded when the Norwegian nobility was largely wiped out by the Black Death, and the power in the Union was largely split between the Danes and the Swedes. The Danish monarch often wanted to consolidate the nation to make it more unified internally. However, the nobility of each state wanted the opposite, so an internal struggle between the wills of the nobility and the monarch constantly undermined the stability in the Union. This, combined with costly wars against trading partners in North Germany, which had the Union on the losing side, constant tax raises, diverging interests, and a shift towards Danish dominance, set in motion a series of revolts by the Swedes, which resulted in their full independence in 1523. Soon after its independence, Sweden was able to gradually consolidate and centralize unlike its European neighbors. But how are they able to do this? Well, there were two reasons. First, Sweden had never been a feudal state. At the start of the 16th century, the free-holding Swedish peasants amounted to around 62% of the population, and they also owned around 50% of the arable land. The nobility held only 22% of the land, while the rest was largely split between the merchant class, the clergy, and various others. Swedish peasants then, compared to continental serfs, were relatively well off, as well as motivated, and they were able to fight for their rights, and they violently resisted any attempt to usurp them or to encroach on their rights. And they also had included representation in the Riksdag, the Swedish estate's parliament. This consolidation effort was further helped by the Danes, who, due to their action known as the Stockholm Bloodbath, not only ended a century-long civil war between the Swedish nobility, but it also largely forced support towards Gustav Vasa. Gustav was able to cancel a good portion of the national debt by taking the majority of church tithes in the nation, while also trying to implement the spread of the Reformation across Sweden without officially breaking with Rome. The tithes collecting and the slow spread of Reformation would cause around a dozen peasant rebellions from the 1520s to the 1540s, the largest of which was the Dhaka War in 1542. But after that point, local rebellions against the Swedes were very rare and easily put down. Sweden was also able to benefit from the weakening of its immediate neighbors. The Hansa was weakened from outside conflict, and the Danes were embroiled in a major civil war. During this time, Gustav Vasa was able to develop a very effective administration, which would stay a massive advantage for centuries. Sweden was ahead of most of the world in using its resources effectively. The nobility was not strong enough to resist, and they became administrators and officers for the state, rather than states within the state as it was in many other nations. Gustav also forced through an inventory of all the land in the nation, essentially meaning who owned it, how productive it was, and thus how much tax was owned on it. This, combined with the nation being rich with natural resources, which included access to copper and silver, and most of the peasants being well enough off that they were able to grow some type of cash crop, allowed for a coin-based economy to to replace bartering earlier than in other nations, which only further increased the effectiveness of the economy. Sweden would find itself surrounded by adverse or hostile powers though. Denmark-Norway was, understandably, still a bit miffed at an independent Sweden, especially once Danish attempts to gain influence in the Livonian Order were thwarted. Russia in the east had long fought over settlements in Finland against the Swedish settlers, especially once the Swedes got involved in Livonia and Estonia by the mid-1550s. And to the south, Poland was eyeing the Swedish Baltic trade domination, and they wished to overtake that profitable market. Potential allies in North Germany from the various duchies and free cities also proved to be futile for the nation. And while they were still in a tense relation with the Danes, the war between the new Danish Union and the North Germans had largely ended, and instead the Swedes were in massive debt to many of these North German states, with one in particular, that being the free city of Lübeck, holding roughly 60% of the remaining debt from the Liberation War, and they intended to make sure that that debt was paid off. To this end, the Danes, Lübeckians, and the Poles allied together to try and take out Sweden once and for all. This timing was perfect too, as war was raging over Russia in the 30-year-long Livonian War, a war which surprisingly all of these combatants as well as the Swedes were already allies in. After a 7-year-long war against Sweden, it would end with a status quo but official dissolvement of the Kalmar Union. The first major action against Sweden had failed, and it would only get tougher from this point on. As from the war against Russia, Sweden would get Estonia from the crumbling Livonian Confederacy, and they gained the important trading city of Reval to go with Viborg on the opposing side of the Bay of Finland. Sweden would come under a personal union with Poland near the end of the 16th century, as Sigismund Vasa III was crowned as the King of Sweden in 1592, and as a regency council take his spot in ruling over Sweden itself while he ruled over Poland. Religious tensions would boil over shortly after, however, as Sigismund would try to force through a number of Catholic churches and Catholic policies into Sweden, much to the chagrin of the Swedish nobility and general public. Duke Charles would wage a rebellion after Sigismund ended up pseudo-forcing him to resign in 1597. The rebellion against Poland would last for just a few months, with Sigismund losing the war, largely due to the lack of noble support within Sweden, and Duke Charles would end up accepting the Swedish crown in 1604. From here, Sweden would see a massive amount of military victories for the next number of years. In the Ingrian War against Russia in the early 17th century, Sweden would capture Ingria and the mouth of the Neva River, which meant that almost all trade to and from Russia had to go through Swedish tolls, and this created a massive source of income for the Swedish state. From campaigns against the Poles and Russians throughout the rest of the century, Gustav Adolphus II would adopt a new form of shock cavalry, and he created the first light mobile artillery as well as refined infantry tactics. After this, though, Sweden would run the rest of the century at nearly constant war. They would use the loot and pillaging of enemy lands to keep its economy going. And this was helped by regular French subsidies, especially during the 30 Years' War. The start of the Swedish Empire is generally credited to this time, more so when they beat the Danish and Norwegians in the Torstenson War in 1645. And following the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648, Silesia and Pomerania would be added to the Swedish fold. Yet, the Swedes would not be done in their quest for expansion. In 1655, the nation would wage a 5-year-long war against the Poles, with eventually expanding to include most of Eastern Europe. From this war, while the Swedish-American colonies would be lost, the Swedes would expand to their largest territorial apex that the nation would ever have, with them annexing the Danish-Norwegian provinces of Skåne, Åland again, Breckland, Brussland, and Ven. Yet, this would be the end of the good news for Sweden, as the future for them would hold little more than weakness, instability, and financial hardship.